For nearly 2,000 years, Christianity's greatest villain has remained unchanged. Judas Iscariot, the betrayer who sold Christ for 30 pieces of silver. His name became synonymous with treachery in every language on earth. Children learn to whisper it with disgust. Artists paint him lurking in shadows, forever marked by shame. But what if that story, carved into stone by centuries of tradition, was completely wrong? In 2006, a crumbling manuscript emerged from the Egyptian desert with a claim so explosive it shook the foundations of biblical scholarship. Judas wasn't the villain. He was the hero. The only disciple who truly understood Jesus' mission. And the early church spent centuries systematically erasing the evidence. Today, we're going to investigate the forbidden knowledge that nearly vanished forever. Let's investigate this further. Before we dive into what this mysterious document actually says, we need to understand something most people don't realize about early Christianity. It wasn't one unified religion. Picture the year 180 AD. No New Testament as we know it. No Vatican. No unified Christian doctrine. Instead, you'd find dozens of communities following Jesus, each with radically different ideas about who he was and what his message meant. Here's where it gets interesting. While some Christians believed salvation came through faith in Christ's death and resurrection, others followed a completely different path. They called themselves Gnostics, from the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge. For them, salvation didn't come from believing the right things. It came from knowing the right secrets. What do you notice here? The Gnostics claimed they possessed hidden teachings, direct revelations from Jesus that the regular apostles had missed or misunderstood. And among these secret teachings was a bombshell, the true story of Judas Iscariot. But here's what makes this investigation fascinating. These weren't fringe beliefs held by a handful of mystics. Gnostic Christianity was massive, sophisticated, and spreading rapidly across the Roman Empire. It had its own gospels, its own theology, its own understanding of Jesus' mission. This raises an intriguing question. If Gnostic texts were so popular, what happened to them? Why do most people today know nothing about the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, or the Gospel of Philip? The answer lies in one of history's most successful cover-ups. As Orthodox Christianity gained political power, especially after Emperor Constantine's conversion in 312 AD, alternative gospels weren't just ignored, they were systematically hunted down and destroyed. Possessing them became a crime punishable by death. The evidence points to something unexpected. What we call biblical Christianity today is actually the result of a brutal theological war, and the Gnostics lost. But here's the twist. Some of their forbidden books survived, buried in desert caves, waiting 17 centuries for rediscovery. Here's where the mystery deepens. Our story begins not with scholars or theologians, but with Egyptian farmers searching for fertilizer in the limestone cliffs near El Minya sometime in the 1970s. What they found instead was a stone box, carefully sealed and hidden in a cave that had served as an ancient burial site. Inside, a leather-bound codex, its papyrus pages covered in Coptic script, the language of Christian Egypt. Look closer at this detail. The farmers had no idea they discovered one of the most controversial religious documents in history. To them, it was just old paper. So they did what desperate people do. They sold it to a local antiquities dealer for whatever cash they could get. Let's investigate this further. The manuscript quickly entered the shadowy world of black market archaeology, a network of dealers, smugglers, and collectors who traffic in stolen cultural heritage. For the next 30 years, this priceless document would be passed from hand to hand, each transaction driving it further from legitimate scholarship. The evidence reveals a heartbreaking pattern. In 1983, the dealer, Hannah, smuggled the codex to Geneva, hoping to sell it to Western scholars for $3 million. A team of experts, including future Coptic specialist Stephen Emmel, was given just a few hours to examine it. Here's what they discovered. The manuscript was authentic, ancient, and potentially revolutionary. But $3 million? In 1983, no university or museum could afford that price. The deal collapsed. And here's where the tragedy begins. For the next 16 years, this irreplaceable piece of human history sat in a bank safety deposit box on Long Island. But not just sitting, slowly disintegrating. Papyrus needs stable temperature and humidity. A metal box in New York's fluctuating climate was essentially a death sentence. What do you notice here? By the year 2000, when the manuscript finally emerged from its vault, entire sections had crumbled to dust. Pages that had survived Roman persecutions, Arab conquests, and 17 centuries in the desert were reduced to fragments by simple neglect. But the worst was yet to come. The investigation uncovers one final insult. In 2000, dealer Bruce Farini made a decision that would horrify conservators worldwide. Concerned about mold, he stored the 1,700-year-old manuscript in his home freezer. The result? A near-total catastrophe that would take modern science 5 years to repair. Here's where it gets interesting. Sometimes the most important discoveries happen not in dusty excavations, but in sterile laboratories. In 2001, Swiss art dealer Frieda Nussberger Chakos finally did what should have been done decades earlier. She donated the crumbling manuscript to the Maecenas Foundation for proper conservation. The foundation immediately contacted one of the world's leading Coptic scholars, Rodolphe Kasser. Let's examine what Kasser found. The manuscript wasn't just damaged, it was pulverized. Farini's freezer had turned flexible papyrus into brittle fragments that shattered at the slightest touch. What had once been a complete book was now thousands of pieces, many no larger than confetti. The evidence points to something remarkable. Instead of declaring the manuscript hopeless, Kasser assembled a team of conservators, photographers, and computer specialists. Their mission? Digital resurrection. Here's how modern forensic techniques work on ancient manuscripts. Each fragment, no matter how small, was photographed under multiple light sources: visible light, ultraviolet, infrared. Different wavelengths revealed different aspects of the ancient ink, making faded letters suddenly visible again. The investigation reveals painstaking detective work. Conservator Florence Darbray spent months matching paper fibers, identifying which fragments belonged together. Computer programs analyzed writing patterns, helping scholars identify where each piece fit in the larger text. What did the scientific tests actually prove? First, carbon-14 dating confirmed the papyrus dated to approximately 280 AD, plus or minus 60 years. Second, ink analysis showed the writing was contemporary with the paper, no medieval forgery. Third, linguistic analysis confirmed the text was written in Coptic, consistent with 3rd to 4th century Egyptian Christianity. But here's what makes this investigation truly fascinating. The team didn't just restore a manuscript, they solved a historical puzzle. Because scattered throughout the document were clues about its original context, scribal notes, binding marks, even ancient repairs that told the story of early readers who treasured this text enough to preserve it. This raises an intriguing question. What was so valuable about this particular document that ancient Christians risked their lives to hide it in a desert cave? The answer would soon shock the scholarly world, because when Kasser's team finally assembled enough fragments to read continuous passages, they realized they weren't just looking at any ancient Christian text. They were looking at the Gospel of Judas. And this is where scholars disagree most violently. Because the Gospel of Judas doesn't just offer a different perspective on the betrayal, it turns the entire Christian story upside down. Let's examine the specific claims line by line. The text opens with Jesus finding his disciples gathered together, performing their ritual prayers and blessing their bread. In any normal gospel, this would be a moment of reverence, of spiritual unity. But here's what the evidence reveals. Jesus starts laughing. When the disciples ask why, Jesus delivers a response that would have horrified Orthodox Christians. "I am not laughing at you, but at your error. You do not do this by your own will, but because through this your God will be praised." What do we make of this seemingly contradictory teaching? Notice the precise wording, "your God," not "our God" or "my Father." Jesus is suggesting that the deity the disciples worship, the God of traditional Judaism and mainstream Christianity, is not the same as his true divine source. The investigation uncovers layer after layer of theological revolution. According to this gospel, Jesus reveals to Judas alone that the material world is a cosmic mistake, created by a lesser, ignorant deity called the Demiurge. The true God exists in a realm of pure spirit, completely separate from physical reality. Here's where it gets interesting. This isn't just abstract theology, it has practical implications for the crucifixion story. In this version, Jesus' physical body is merely a temporary shell imprisoning his divine spirit. Death isn't a sacrifice for humanity's sins, it's liberation from the material world's corruption. And Judas? He's not a traitor driven by greed or possessed by Satan. He's the only disciple who understands the true plan. When Jesus asks Judas to hand over the man who bears me, he's asking for help escaping his physical prison. Let's investigate this further. The text presents Judas's betrayal as the ultimate act of loyalty and the ultimate sacrifice. Jesus warns Judas that he will be cursed by other generations, but promises that ultimately Judas will rule over them. The evidence points to something unexpected, a complete moral inversion of the traditional story. The apostles who became saints are portrayed as confused and misguided. Peter, James, and John are shown worshiping the wrong God and fundamentally misunderstanding Jesus' mission. Only Judas receives the secret knowledge necessary for true salvation. But here's what modern readers often miss. This isn't meant to be a historical account of what actually happened in first-century Palestine. The Gospel of Judas was written around 150 to 180 AD, more than a century after the events it describes. It's a theological manifesto, using familiar characters to promote Gnostic beliefs about the nature of reality, salvation, and spiritual knowledge. And this is where scholars disagree. Some see it as a fascinating window into early Christian diversity. Others view it as dangerous heresy that rightfully was suppressed. But one question remains. If this was just one alternative interpretation among many, why did Orthodox leaders work so hard to destroy it? Here's what the evidence reveals about the most successful censorship campaign in religious history. The first recorded attack on the Gospel of Judas comes from Irenaeus, Bishop of Lyon, writing around 180 AD. In his massive work, Against Heresies, Irenaeus doesn't just criticize the text, he declares war on it. Let's examine what church leaders were actually afraid of. Irenaeus writes, "They declare that Judas the traitor was thoroughly acquainted with these things, and that he alone, knowing the truth as no others did, accomplished the mystery of the betrayal." What do you notice here? Irenaeus isn't arguing that the Gospel of Judas is historically inaccurate. He's horrified by its theological implications. Because if Judas was right, then the entire foundation of Orthodox Christianity was wrong. The investigation uncovers 3 specific threats that made this text unacceptable to church authorities. First, divine unity. Orthodox Christianity was built on monotheism, one God who both created the world and sent Jesus to save it. The Gospel of Judas shattered this unity, claiming the Creator was an ignorant, inferior deity, while Jesus came from a higher realm entirely. Accept this text, and you're essentially saying the Old Testament God is the villain. Here's where it gets interesting. Second threat, bodily resurrection. Orthodox Christianity promised believers that their physical bodies would be raised from the dead and perfected. But Gnostic texts, like the Gospel of Judas, taught that physical matter was inherently corrupt, that salvation meant escaping the body, not redeeming it. For church leaders promising resurrection to martyrs facing Roman persecution, this was theological poison. But the documents reveal the most dangerous threat was political: apostolic authority. The emerging Orthodox Church claimed its bishops were successors to the 12 apostles, inheriting their divine authority to interpret Scripture and lead the faithful. And this is where scholars find the smoking gun. The Gospel of Judas doesn't just challenge specific doctrines, it portrays the apostles themselves as fundamentally mistaken, worshiping the wrong God, and misunderstanding Jesus' mission. If this text was authentic, then apostolic succession was built on a foundation of ignorance and error. The evidence points to something systematic. Church leaders didn't just disagree with Gnostic texts, they treated them as an existential threat requiring complete elimination. By the 4th century, possessing books like the Gospel of Judas became a capital offense. Here's how the cover-up worked. First, official condemnation. Bishops declared Gnostic texts heretical, and their readers excommunicate. Second, legal prohibition. After Constantine legalized Christianity, owning heretical books became a crime under imperial law. Third, physical destruction. Organized raids confiscated and burned Gnostic libraries. The investigation reveals the brutal efficiency of this campaign. Within 2 centuries, texts that had been widely read across the Roman Empire vanished almost completely from the historical record. Only a handful survived, buried by believers who hoped future generations might judge them more fairly. But here's what makes this story truly fascinating. The Church's victory was so complete that when the Gospel of Judas finally resurfaced in 2006, most Christians had never heard that alternative versions of Christianity had even existed. And then the pieces fell into place. This wasn't just about one manuscript or one controversial claim about Judas Iscariot. This was about power, about who gets to tell Christianity's story, about what happens when dangerous truths threaten established authority. The Gospel of Judas wasn't banned because it was false. It was banned because it was dangerous. Stand in the presence of this ancient text, and you begin to understand what terrified the early church. This wasn't simply a disagreement about historical details or theological fine points. This was a fundamental challenge to everything Orthodox Christianity claimed about reality itself. Consider what was at stake. The Gospel of Judas suggested that the material world, including the church's buildings, rituals, and hierarchy, might be distractions from true spiritual reality. It implied that secret knowledge, not public faith, was the path to salvation. It portrayed individual enlightenment as superior to institutional authority. And most threatening of all, it suggested that the apostles themselves, the foundation of church authority, were fundamentally misguided servants of an inferior deity. Feel the weight of this revelation. If the Gospel of Judas was authentic, then centuries of Christian teaching, martyrdom, and institutional development had been built on a cosmic mistake. The heroes were villains. The villain was the hero. And the church itself was an elaborate obstacle to genuine spiritual truth. Here's what the suppression really represents. The moment Christianity chose uniformity over diversity, authority over individual revelation, institutional survival over theological exploration. Church leaders didn't just reject the Gospel of Judas, they erased the very possibility of questioning their version of events. The truth finally revealed itself, and nothing would be the same. Because what emerged from those Egyptian caves wasn't just an alternative reading of familiar events. It was evidence that early Christianity was far stranger, far more diverse, and far more intellectually vibrant than Orthodox tradition had ever admitted. This ancient papyrus forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. The Christianity we know today is not the inevitable result of historical truth gradually emerging. It's the product of human choices, political calculations, and the systematic silencing of alternative voices. Some knowledge, it seems, was deemed too dangerous for believers to possess. The Gospel of Judas reminds us that history is written by the winners, and that the losers' stories can stay buried for 17 centuries before accidentally resurfacing in a limestone cave. What we know is remarkable. Early Christianity was a battlefield of competing ideas, where the line between orthodoxy and heresy was drawn by political power, not divine revelation. What we don't know might be even more so. Every year, new manuscripts emerge from desert sands, monastery libraries, and private collections, challenging our assumptions about what early believers actually thought and taught. And yet, questions remain. Mysteries were still unraveling. How many other texts were successfully erased? What alternative versions of Christianity might have developed if different voices had triumphed? The investigation continues, and the questions multiply. What other forbidden biblical texts deserve serious scholarly investigation? What do you think early church leaders were most afraid of losing?